Welcome everyone to the Product Operating Excellence mini-series hosted by Product Operations HQ, also sponsored by Dragonboat. And in today's session, we're going to cover how to accelerate strategic impact at scale. And it's a Ask Me Anything session with Aaron Hall. We're going to introduce Aaron proper. And here is Aaron. My name is Becky Flint. I am your host today. I'm the founder and CEO of Dragonboat. Today's session is also sponsored by Dragonboat. So for some of you who are not familiar with the Dragonboat, it is an AI-powered platform for product leaders to accelerate strategic impact, of course, across your product operating models. It is adopted by many, many leading companies, including Aaron's current company as well. And we're very excited to be able to not only be a software provider, also be your partner and provide the community for all of us to learn and improve and getting better on driving and accelerating strategic impact. With that, and without further ado, I want to introduce you proper, Aaron Hall. Aaron today is the VP of Portfolio and Project Management and Chief of Staff at Carfax. And he also teaches an MBA program as Adjunct Professor at Virginia Tech. And Aaron, for some of you who are not familiar with the Carfax, is a part of S&P Global, company listed at New York Stock Exchange. So we're going to hear a little bit more from Aaron about that in a couple of minutes. And prior to that, so Aaron has a very, very diverse background and career-wise. So leading large-scale organizations, not only he's doing that today, running the entire portfolio delivery and best practices at Carfax. He also has previously led a large-scale organization and programs and StrideDeck K-12, AL, New Star, and he also has a very interesting background in the U.S. Army officer served in aviation engineering. So as you can see how much diverse background and bring into driving business impact. And last but not least, Aaron is the certified PMP professional, and his team was one of the nominated the best program management. Sorry if I got it wrong, Aaron, maybe you can clarify a little bit more. I definitely saw it somewhere as one of the best team by the PMI organization as well. So without further ado, please welcome Aaron Hall and join us to have the conversation on how to accelerate strategic impact through portfolio management and other great insights.
Good morning, Becky, and to the audience that's out there. It's great to be here with you all. At least I assume it's morning for most of us, but happy to be here with you all today and tell you a little bit about our story. I thought I'd start with a little bit of context because we have been on a journey towards effective strategic portfolio management. And honestly, guys, I think all of us are on a journey towards that. I'm not sure you ever get there. Don't get me wrong. And maybe the marketers at Dragonboat would say, hey, Dragonboat can get you there. And I think it can. I just think in general, right? Conceptually, practically, culturally, doing strategic portfolio management really is a journey, and we've been on an interesting one. I'm hopeful that most of you are familiar with Carfax. Perhaps you've seen the Fox out on TV talking to you or whatever else. But I wanted to start with our mission real quick, because this is what drives us. We are all about helping millions and millions of people literally every day shop for, buy, service, and sell cars. For most of us, that's a pretty stressful endeavor. And we have labored for the past 40 years to really establish ourselves as the global leader with respect to vehicle history information that helps consumers do that. And over those same 40 years, we built a great set of industry partners, car dealerships, service shops, banks, insurance companies, law enforcement agencies, and so on. More on the B2B side of the house. We do business throughout the world. I'll focus mostly on our US market today, but we've got businesses in Europe, Canada, Mexico as well. I think probably the most interesting thing with respect to portfolio management for us, literally half of our staff are directly involved with product and technology delivery. So whether we do portfolio management well or not, we're touching a lot of people's lives. And by the way, the other half, they're affected indirectly, right? By what they can market, what they can sell, what they can collect revenue on, and so on. So you can see here, a little bit, some great statistics about our positioning in the marketplace. And like I said, we're just over 40 years old. For the first 30 years, we were really focused with a laser beam on vehicle history, on gathering data, making it available to consumers, establishing ourselves in the industry, and really helping consumers as they go through that purchase process, right? Which is, for most of us, buying a home is pretty crazy and stressful. The next best thing, buying a vehicle, right? And then dealing with that. The last several years, really, or the next period of time, onto the next slide, Becky, if you would, we started to kind of look at. Oh, it looks like we started to look at the automotive process, if you will, as more of a life cycle. So if you look at that blue ring on the outside, right, consumers, most of us probably, by the way, too, are in one of those phases, right? We're either shopping for, or we're buying, or we're owning, or we're selling a vehicle, right, at one given point in time. And those questions in the bubbles around are things that consumers often have, right? We recognize that, gosh, there's a ton of questions consumers have. And we set out to build really, really powerful products and capabilities for consumers that answer those questions, right? So whether it's knowing what vehicles are available, or how to service my vehicle at the right time, how to sell my vehicle, or what's my vehicle worth, those types of things. So for the past, gosh, depending on how you count, 8 to 12 years, we were really focused on building very discrete, focused products and a lot of sub products, probably around 40 or so different sub products that ladder up to these orange items, leveraging what you can see in the center, our core product delivery availability, the trust and strength of our neutral consumer brand, and then the partnerships we have across the B2B space. And of course, our great culture. We're going to come back to Carfax's culture a few times today. So leveraging all of those, and then being laser focused on building, dedicated teams that were really effective at building these discrete products. But that's the cute, but maybe it's the next slide. As we moved into this decade, and that sounds really old, I kind of post-pandemic, we really started to realize, look, the time to build discrete products and focus on those has really passed. And it was about integrating those and building a life cycle type of capability, really a suite of integrated products, and helping consumers, whether they knew they needed it or not, move throughout that life cycle with grace. And as you can imagine, our initiatives became much more complex. Our business became much more complex, and we had to move away from that sort of discrete delivery model and decision-making model into a much more integrated and frankly complex decision-making and delivery model, which is what really has driven our march down the path towards more strategic portfolio management. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of context about our business, about our journey for the first sort of 40 or so years, and where we've been for the last 2 to 3 years. And ultimately, frankly, we're still working through it today. As I said, it's a journey, and we're on it.
It is a journey. It's definitely a journey. And I think, thank you so much for the context. Very much appreciate it. I think it's really, really interesting. You mentioned so many interesting topics. So I want to maybe just kind of get started first on the question of, let's talk about strategic portfolio management. How do you think about it as your organization moving through the journey, so to speak, as your company grow, as you thinking about core part of business for the sort of the buying cars, to really break it down into many pieces? How do you think about strategic portfolio management? Actually, I think you also teaches class around the topic of project portfolio management in general. So would love to hear your thoughts on sort of the evolution and how you see it differently, and how company today operates in that context.
Yeah, oh, it's a great question. And it's funny, the first 2 words that came to mind when you asked, Becky, are art and science. So and every time I talk to people about what portfolio management is, I usually will say it is the art and science of continuously sort of selecting and managing the optimum set of projects, programs, initiatives, maybe is a better term, that deliver maximum business value, right? And hence allow us to achieve strategic objectives. And I say art and science because I do think a lot of organizations get into it and they're looking for a formula. They're looking for a rubric, right? Some mechanism. Well, let me send an email that allows an executive to vote on this. And if all the votes come out, above 37, that means we're going to go do it. I mean, some organizations do that, and maybe there's a scenario where that makes the most sense. For us, there is both a scientific component, but also the art of conversation, right? Recognizing that our organization, as well as our business, is a living, breathing entity full of human beings who have different experiences, different risk tolerances, things like that. But we want to make sure, and this has been, there are 4 questions that we've been focusing on as we've been rolling through this journey. One, are we investing in our products and our platforms at the right levels, in the right way, at the right time, given the dynamics of the market and things that we're seeing? Are we working on the right projects? Are we applying our resources? Do we even, in the right way, do we even have the right number and types of resources? And, again, are we responding dynamically to the changes that are happening, whether that's inside the organization, market disruptors, all of those types of things. It's a mechanism to enable us to answer some of those questions.
Right. So, you mentioned quite a few topics, very interesting. I want to just bubble it up. I think traditionally people think about sort of the product management. There's a project management, for better or worse. There's some kind of stigma around that term these days. And then there are also sort of the portfolio management, somewhat new, even though it's not new for us being practicing our whole career. But for some people today, they may think about new. So how do you see sort of product management and project management, portfolio management? Sometimes there are titles like product operations today, right? So how do you see this term and roles evolve, and how does it play in your current sort of the operations model?
Another good question. I'm guessing they're all going to be good questions at this point, by the way. Maybe I should stop saying that. But because I think, like, for you and I, there's a very clear distinction between these roles, these functions, right? But for most people, I think anything that starts with a P&M is pretty much the same, right? But I look at them, on the one hand, very distinct, but on the other hand, quite complementary. A lot of times if you hear the phrase yin and yang, you think of 2 elements. I think of these as sort of a 3-way yin and yang. They complement each other. And I think, I truly believe if an organization is phenomenal at one without working on and having a capability in the other 2, it's going to be suboptimized. I mean, in the short term, they may, generate some wonderful things, let's say, some outputs from the entity, but I really do think you've got to have a strength in each, right? So if I look at portfolio management, I think about, are we meeting the organization's strategic goals? I mean, there's a lot of things you could ask in and around that, but to me, it all boils down to that, right? Whereas on the product management side, the offerings that we have, are they competitive? Whether, with respect to competitors that are out in the market, how are we pricing them, placing them, packaging them? What kind of feedback are we getting, right, from customers? What's the evolution of our capabilities and features in those products and so on? Whereas down at the execution level in around program and project management, are we tactically executing our projects effectively? And those projects, of course, are driving the evolution of our products and platforms, right, to deliver value. And I want to be careful. I know we may have some project management folks with us, and I'm a PM. Sorry, I did it. I'm a project manager at my core. But I don't mean to imply, I use the word tactical there. I don't mean to imply that project management is tactical while the other 2 are not. Just relative to portfolio management, I think portfolio management is much more of a strategic activity than the other 2, which are probably more in the operational and tactical dimension or paradigm. But just in my view.
Right.
It's
very interesting how you describe it. And I 100% agree with you in some ways, these roles are played by one person, right? We all perform some level of project management, regardless of your C-level executives or your job title as a project manager. And obviously, as our role evolve at the more executive level, you have a broader concern on portfolio decisions. And the product management is also part of it. Like, so it's also a skill. Like, hey, this conversation we have, this talk we have, is a product that educate customers or our users. So I think those are very, very valuable skills. They're, learning how to execute projects is critical. So you can't just have a good strategy, a good product you want to build, and then you fail at the building that part. That's not good. So before we get started, you actually mentioned sort of the triangle, and I think it's a very good analogy. Would love to hear, like, share broadly how you evolve your organization to think about different roles play together in the context of strategic portfolio management and also in the context of operating model.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Well, they're all good questions. We've already established that. At Carfax for years, we've had what we refer to as a boat model. I'll come back to that. Originally, we actually called it the triangle. And the short story there is years ago, one of our engineering leaders and I were talking about how we could kind of make our delivery teams more effective. And we were standing at his whiteboard and we drew up 3 roles. And we said, in order for teams to deliver, you've really got to have both strong but aligned product, project, and technology leaders, right? All 3 of those people have to both be competent, but they have to be aligned. They have to have a bond. It's got to be trust-based, and they've got to lead the team forward. And so we drew a triangle around them, and we sort of said, hey, no one really wants to be on the triangle team. That doesn't sound very inviting. And it was right about that time where I said, design actually plays a pretty key role in most of our projects as well. Why don't we think of this more as a box, if you will, where we have 4 key leaders: product, project, design, and technology, that have to be working together. And it was funny, the way we drew the box, the triangle happened to be just above it. And so it looked sort of like the bow of a rowboat above the body of a rowboat. And we went, aha, that actually looks like a boat. And the idea of these 4 leaders rowing in a boat on a body of water in the same direction at the same piece to keep us moving forward versus zigzagging all over the lake or what have you, just was too good to resist. So, over the past 8 or 9 years, the boat metaphor has taken off, and it's a wonderful connection to Dragonboat, given the iconography and the intent behind your name. And,
Right. Exactly. That's definitely our intent on sort of everyone rolling in the same direction, because it takes more than one function and one skill to move the organization forward. So a lot of times, there's some sort of the switch in focus. Sometimes people focus on engineering, sometimes the people focus on, sort of the product management, and sometimes, people think about other aspects, go to marketing, others. But if you really don't put everyone together, then you could build a best product and then nobody buying it, or you could, have a best roadmaps and engineering the team cannot deliver, or you don't have the strategic allocation lined up so that the team is just stuck because one team has the resources, the other team doesn't. So you do really have to tie that together. So I want to kind of bring that back. As you shared earlier, Carfax obviously is a very, very large organization. And evolved a lot, and even more, you add more sort of bring the sort of the core product into multiple pieces. So that's definitely, we see a lot of organization evolve, right? You have agile, you have sort of empower the team, and then so how does it play the sort of the agile organization and then sort of strategic planning and strategic portfolio management? How does it play out in your organization?
Yeah, good question. I'm going to say that every time. I feel like I need a buzzer each time I do. It's funny. One of the biggest challenges I've had, certainly for probably the last 15 or 16 years, is conveying to people that dynamic yet but structured strategic planning, whether that's at the enterprise level or all the way down to the tactical level where projects get executed, can and do actually work quite well together along with agile product and technology delivery, right? I think a lot of people are zealots. They're very focused on, agile is iterative and fun, and we don't do planning, and we don't write anything down, blah, blah. Well, that's not really actually true either. It's just that there are other things valued more than that. But I firmly believe these two are not polar opposites. They can and actually do coexist quite well. This is a great source of debate, by the way, in the MBA class I teach, where people who are coming, they're just hardcore project managers, and they think agilists are, out to lunch and full of it, and vice versa, by the way. So we have some really good spirited debate there. But I've had a lot of it in the workplace as well. I'll tell you at Carfax, all of our software development has been done in an agile manner for probably 10 to 12 years, depending on which teams we're looking on. Early on, I'll tell you, before we really got into true strategic portfolio management, our strategic planning was done really in an agile delivery context came down to kind of how many teams we had and how those large teams were. If you think about those kind of niche little sub-product teams I alluded to earlier, they were effectively kind of portfolio managed or optimized from an investment perspective based on having dedicated teams and the size of those teams, because that equates to money, which is the investment the company puts into the machine. It was the transition to really that more integrated lifecycle strategy over the last several years that caused us to pivot away from having those persistently dedicated teams. That's what we're in the middle or sort of on the tail end of now. I'll tell you, one of the interesting concerns that I've heard over and over too was it's kind of a head scratcher for me, to be honest with you, is around the worries about esprit de corps. Because there are some folks who feel like, hey, when we were really dedicated, we had teams dedicated to this bespoke and really focused product delivery spaces. Everybody identified with the product or the platform or what have you that they were working on. And they all, they had the tattoo on their bicep and they all had songs they sang and things like that. And now that's all gone. Well, and it really is not, right? I mean, projects in some cases actually can provide more esprit de corps, and having a more flexible staffing model, right, that's led by our portfolio management intent, can actually bring different kind of phases or types of esprit de corps. Because, by the way, one of the biggest things you get esprit de corps and excitement and a sense of accomplishment from is concluding a project, right? So it's been an interesting transition for us. I mean, for sure, like agile delivery and strategic portfolio management, they're not the same thing. But I do think a lot of the tenets that are foundational to each of them, communication, transparency, iteration and seeking feedback, the value of having a conversation over some sort of formulaic, determination or gory detailed planning, they're more common than I think most people think, right? Because at the end of the day, strategic portfolio management is about being flexible with one's business, I believe, as things change in the marketplace. And on the agile side, if for you to be successful in agile, you've really got to be flexible and agile up and down the organization, meaning inside and outside of your development teams. That same agility is going to benefit you from a strategic portfolio management perspective as well. So I think there's a lot more in common than most people think when they think about it.
I 100% agree with you. There's a couple of things definitely observed in the last not a couple of years, probably like over a decade now, but in different company, different operating sort of maturity. I think a few things you mentioned are very important, right? So regardless of your strategic portfolio management, which is driving business outcomes, right? Or in agile, and especially agile product development, is driving customer and business outcomes. So if you look at that, you shouldn't fall in love with the functions or group I'm in, because that's sort of like efficient production machine, right? Oh, I'm working here. I know I'm very efficient. I think to some degree is good. But if you continue to do that, it become a sort of a peanut buttering your portfolio, because you have this dedicated team doing the same thing, right? So it's definitely not the
100%.
best. And the second part I would say is the strategic agility. The strategic agility is how to solve a problem at a bigger scale. So then agile practice is a broader sort of under the umbrella of a strategic agility, which that means that the team will shift around. Hey, look, what happened? OpenAI happened. Everyone's shifting their business. If you don't, I think your days are numbered, right? So it's just the reality that we operate is you don't just agile at the local team level. You have to be agile at the portfolio level. That means the strategy will drive where the team gonna solve, what problem the team gonna solve. It could be the tattooed thing, or it could be something else, but we really should be falling in love with the problems we try to solve. Then this piece of, whatever wedge or whatever things we're gonna build, right? So I think that really coming together nicely. And I think, kind of sort of switch gear a little bit. Obviously doing this is hard, especially when you have larger organization And it's definitely beyond like one or two Scrum team in Jira or whatever, right? That's just like a small scale optimization is okay. But when you look at bigger scale, it's much different. So I know that in the earlier days, when our team first talked to your team, there was a very famous Jeopardy style of a diagram that actually looked very similar to the product operating model. So tell a little bit of what is that Jeopardy style diagram, and how did it come along? Why is it important? How do you use it?
Hmm. Oh my goodness. Famous, you say? Infamous, perhaps. I'll tell
Famous
you,
peacock.
I've
It's the
had
peacock.
I've had several moments in my career where I did some brainstorming on something on this whiteboard behind me, and one of our C-level execs came by and said, "Hey, what is that? That looks really good. Can you make it portable and presentable and bring it up to our executive conference room?" I got a longtime colleague who sits outside my door right now, and she has, well, she's had a lot of chuckles at that over the years. But listen, there's no rocket science here to the Jeopardy board. I don't want anyone to, jump out and Google, Aaron's Jeopardy board. This is essentially kind of a color coded and functionally tagged depiction of the major changes we needed to initiate and manage collectively in order to implement strategic portfolio management at Carfax. One of the most common things, and again, I don't know if you can see our Carfax playbook back here. If you want to just Google Carfax playbook, you'll find the artifact. It's a wonderful depiction or representation of our culture that we truly embody, and it is having worked a lot of places, as you said earlier, we have a very different culture there. Um, the transparency is very key for us within our culture. And I've owned the fact that the amount of change that we are bringing to the organization is probably too much several times. I've just owned that. I've shared that. I've acknowledged that. The challenge is, I used the word earlier, collectively, like these changes are interconnected, right? So getting to a point where we have a clear set of strategic objectives with an articulated problem that the business is trying to solve, with 3 or 4 significant value driving initiatives associated with them. Like that's fundamental. By the way, I'd argue that's even pre-portfolio management. That's about business strategy, right? That the portfolio then picks up on and goes. Just getting through that exercise was challenging. In fact, it's still going on, by the way. That doesn't stop, in my opinion, right? That's ongoing. But that's one piece. Establishing a common delivery life cycle with roles and responsibilities once we get into execution, stopping the projects that don't align with that business strategy. Oh my gosh. And by the way, I'm not the traffic cop, but sometimes I do feel like a crossing guard, right? And my sign doesn't say stop. I turn it around. My sign says slow. And I'm like, okay, guys, let's just make sure that this thing that you're trying to either start or make sure continues truly is aligned with that objective. Because guys, it doesn't sound like it to me, but I don't get a vote. I mean, I think that's an interesting part of this discussion too. My role is one of neutrality. I am not advocating in one way or another. Don't get me wrong. I want to see the company move forward and be successful, but these are just 3 or 4 different they were probably, I don't know, 12 or 15 items, Becky, that we had to move forward together. Capacity management, a whole new view into what people are doing and how they're doing, classifying our work in a different way. And so it was simply a way for me to share, but then also maintain kind of a view of where we were on the paradigm across each of them, and then ultimately overall. So.
Yeah, I think you brought on so many very important topics. We can probably have like 3 sessions to talk about that. But one of the key thing I think a lot of times going back, right? So people are proud of their work. And regardless of sort of tattoo on your team, or in the case the projects or initiative gonna stop and then go, it is difficult to see it locally, right? Because people make optimization decisions based on the information you have. But when you take a step back, look at portfolio level, all of a sudden this seems to be a good idea in the beginning, may no longer be a good idea because things changed or this become a much bigger effort and whatnot. So you do the effective decision at any level, executive and the team level, is to say, is our thesis still correct? Should we still invest in there something new coming around? And the only thing that's not changing is the change itself, right? Everything's changing, it's changing very fast. It's changing faster and faster in this world. So let's talk about it. How that, the transformation, you kind of obviously touch upon sort of a journey. It never ends, it continues to evolve, right? Just the
Yeah.
world is evolving. And let's talk a little bit about tooling, because our organization this size, the speed of this much change, there's many people. So, I
Yeah.
know you chose Dragonboat after a long evaluation. It's not a small decision, for sure. I would love to hear a little bit more of how you think about it. And then
Yeah.
tooling itself, and how, what checked the box of why is it important?
Yeah. Great. Another good question. I'll tell you, first and foremost, we don't start with the tool. We don't start with the tool. I'm not ashamed to tell you, every time we found a need for a new process at Carfax over the last 10 years that I knew would ultimately be enabled and automated and optimized by a myriad of tools out there, we started manually. And yeah, that meant a lot of post-it notes, a lot of Excel, and a lot of PowerPoint. And that was okay. Whether it was portfolio management or basic road mapping, day-to-day project or work management, et cetera, we found it really effective. Define a process, get it going, get some feedback on it before looking at a tool, right? Because I don't want to zoom in on a tool, find one we like, and then have to bend our process and our culture into the tool. And I'll tell you the other thing that's interesting for Carfax, and we haven't had, I got to give credit to our CIO for this. I haven't had this freedom elsewhere. We have definitely taken a best of breed strategy, not one that's driven by a single company or brand who's built a tool, or an enterprise strategy to all be on one platform. And of course, this brings some interoperability and sometimes cost efficiency challenges, but I really believe that best of breeds approach has served us well. If I think back to our path to beginning to work with your team and leverage Dragonboat over the last year, we looked at a lot of tools in the portfolio management space. No doubt. But many of them, by the way, much heavier, much more integrated, really intricate sort of insights and analytics. But at the end of the day, like, our culture is not one that requires all of that, number one, nor would it tolerate like all of the governance and administration associated or required really to need it all to work. I mean, we needed enough of it so that we could integrate with Jira, deliver really engaging visualizations, some of the great views that you guys have, the capacity management I mentioned earlier. But we also wanted to find an organization like yours that had a great culture that matched ours, that was growing and that we could grow along with. I mean, that was all really important to us. And to be fair, I should probably mention, we've also sunset some tools just in the last 10 years that I've been here, even ones that I brought into the organization. And I don't look at this as a failure. I think of this as a journey, right? If you think about being agile and iterative, I mean, as our maturity has grown and the complexity of our business, we recognize that some of the tools that made sense for us in the 2010s, they just don't make sense for us in the 2020s. So let's make a conscious decision and move on.
Yeah, this is a super, super insightful. I think that was a question. Someone raised a hand. Please type in your question in the chat so that I can capture that well, because the host is kind of harder to do the live audio. Meanwhile, I do want to go kind of touch upon a little bit on the things you mentioned, which is sort of the transformation would have the people, the process, and ultimately the technology enable that, but not the other way around. You don't choose tool before you choose the other thing. I
Yeah,
do
I do. Some
also
people,
really
I do.
appreciate.
Go ahead.
I really do. So the question is, what are some of your change management best practices for transformational change? I think obviously that's one of the common question we also get. Like, how do you make that kind of change
Yeah.
big scale?
Yeah. I'll throw in a couple of things that come to mind. Like, one is communicate early, communicate often. And one of the down, it sounds like a little cliche there, right? One of the downsides or the tricky parts of that is when you're talking to folks early, you don't always know everything. And again, this is where I can be, I mean, I'm a pretty honest guy, and I want to be transparent with folks. I've done this with my team, with our engineering leaders, with our executives. I know where we're going. I know where we're going to, I have a plan for how we're going to get there. I can't tell you each step, each day, each hour of how that's going to unfold. And part of that, by the way, is because I think there's more value in getting going and getting some feedback and then charting the next course. I mean, it's like sprinting, to be honest with you. But I think your organization has to be willing to accept that. And some organizations really want to know exactly how and when are we going to get there. I think the other, and this is going to be another cliche, know your audience, right? So when I'm sitting down with my PMO folks and talking through things with them and hearing their challenges and pain, I'm having a different conversation than when I'm our executive conference room talking with our C-level folks. It's not that one is better or different or smarter or whatever than the other. The problems and the challenges are different. The tolerance for jargon is different. Those types of things. For example, I don't refer to Dragonboat as Dragonboat with our C-level folks. It's our portfolio management platform. And sorry for your marketers if that makes anybody upset, but the reality is it makes them scratch their head because our head of our marketing and our CFO, they don't really get, they can't make the connection or whatever. But when we first started talking about portfolio management, and I said, you guys all have a 401k, right? That's a portfolio, and your investment decision making is exactly what we're going to do here. We just need to identify the parameters and how often we're going to look at it and so on, just like you do with your investment, person. So anyway, so those are a couple of things.
Super helpful. And I think especially people sometimes forget, every Scrum team has about 5 people. We're easily talk about a couple $1 million, right? So if you have a 10 Scrum team, how many $1 million we're talking about? Just the cost alone, not opportunity cost, and not the other things, right? Just the people cost alone, let alone the surrounding, people around it. So that's definitely a portfolio management. If we don't have a broader view on where it goes, then it could go to things that are not driving the most important impact. And in today's world, so competitive, fast changing, if we're not making the most important impact, then we would be losing opportunity and or losing market share. So in both cases are not good. Either case not good. So one of the things that we heard, obviously, I think quite often from a lot of customers, like, what are some of the most challenging or lessons that you learn in, sort of more details on how do you accelerate strategic impacts?
Well, so on the first front, on the challenges front, right? Let's just get it out on the table. Change is hard. By the way, I'll own it. I'm not really good with change. My wife will tell you that first and foremost. But change is hard for all people and all organizations. No matter how easy or hard it is for you, odds are it is different for others. So I think like knowing that and acknowledging that up front is key. Well, if I go back to what I said when we were talking about the Jeopardy board, too much change can be too much. We're actually having a pretty spirited debate right now with one of our C-level execs around one of those Jeopardy board components and whether we should pull it back. And I'll tell you, like, I'm definitely on one side of that debate and he is on the other. And one of my directors is right in the middle trying to get us to come together, and I don't want to come together. And I'm just sharing that with you guys to be transparent, because it's hard, and I may have to give, even though I don't particularly want to be honest with you. And I don't think, and I'm not being personal about it, I don't think it's in the best interest of the company.
Right.
But I may not be right. I don't have a trump card, right, to play. So I think, those are certainly some of the challenges there. The other thing, and I don't know many organizations that can stop the trains for 30 or 60 days, figure all this stuff out, and start from scratch. So I can't tell you the number of times I've said, hey team, look, let's just pause for a minute. If we all showed up tomorrow, all 50 or 5,000 of us or whatever, and said, how should this work? We could chart the course, right? We could put the tools in, we could put the processes in, and we would get going. But the reality is we got a living, breathing organization. We're taking revenue in, we're spending money on a whole bunch of different things. We have projects that are in flight. Like, we're trying to make, I really don't care for that whole build the plane while we're flying it, but we are flying a plane while we're trying to build another. How about that? We're building a second plane in the air while we're flying a parallel one. And that's tricky. Like, that is hard. So again, deep breath. Every once in a while, there's not coffee in this cup. That gets me through some of the weekends, evenings maybe. But yeah, definitely a lot of challenges there.
This is actually very interesting. I want to add a little bit of color from my experience as well, is that true, change is very difficult and it's a long journey. then one of the key things is to show people the progress you've made.
Yes, right
Because
on.
then you actually can get people continuously engaged and onboarded. And I know one of the things also we talk about is, so how do you show people what you're getting? So when we started Dragonboat, we had a complete product operations platform that cover strategy, the roadmap, the intake, capacity management, PDLC, and delivery orchestration. Some company just not ready to take all of that. The Jeopardy board example, right? So now what we found out is that regardless, there's a baseline.
Yeah.
The baseline is visibility. People
Yep.
want to know where we are. People want to know where we're going. So now we actually start to see more companies say, hey, we were not ready on all the other stuff, but we're ready to see where we are today in terms of our portfolio. Like we call it portfolio intelligence. So you know where you are today, and then linked to all the different data and systems, so you know where you are today. And then from there, you can say, okay, now we can add one. So as I'm talking about that, maybe I would just put a visual out, and then continue talking about the putting your question in. I think as we are talking through this, maybe Aaron, just talk through a little bit of your observation of what has changed in the last decade or so as you're teaching the class and moving from different types of companies and industries and practice into the world we are today. And then I'll kind of jump into the sort of the Jeopardy
Sure.
like board as well.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the different, companies I've worked at. One of the neat things about my profession of, project portfolio management, et cetera, it's very portable, right? So if I look back on my career, whether it was the time I served in the Army or worked with the federal government as a civilian, and whether I was in the telecommunications, internet, education, or automotive industries, a lot of the needs are really quite similar. The context changes, but the function, the needs, the worries, the challenges, and so on are very similar. I mean, to be honest with you, my before Carfax, I was at a great company called K-12, and probably one of the most passionate organizations I've been a part of. And it was full at the time that I joined with really, really experienced and academically credentialed leaders focused on making great, like super high quality products for kids who go to school virtually, right? Which is wonderful. I had young kids at the time. I was very passionate about it as well. But portfolio management, very tricky in that space, right? Because getting to a decision based on kind of a composite view of the organization's goals, as opposed to solely making decisions based on the educational impact of an investment, was really not a popular approach. I definitely had some headwinds. And I think a key differentiator too, where organization is also where it is on its growth curve. Like when I joined Newstar way back in the day, this was old Newstar, not the current organization today, but we had just spun off from our legacy parent company and gone public. We had a lot of capital. We were in big time growth mode. We were trying to demonstrate to everyone we were a viable standalone entity in business. That was very different than when I was at AOL, that little internet company you may have heard of.
That's right.
And by the way, I didn't get rich off of AOL. I joined after our heyday. I lived through the Time Warner acquisition. It was not a merger, by the way. It was an acquisition where we purchased them. And ultimately, through the beginning of AOL's decline, you might not say that AOL was as mature as a General Electric or a Verizon or whatever, but it was rather mature as far as strategic investment decision making, and much more so than Newstar. So the dialogue was different. I think a lot just depends on where an organization is on their growth curve.
That is just so cool. That's actually what we heard this a lot of. We call it a product operating or portfolio operating excellence or maturity curve. Like, I kind of highlight here a little bit of like, there's every company has a strategy and outcomes. Like you mentioned, like K-12 may have different strategy because they focus on different outcome versus AOL versus Carfax, maybe Carfax today versus, 5 years ago. That is always there, but they're not really at the level of maturity driving portfolio yet, right? It's just operating on its own, or maybe customers and capacity management, as you mentioned, right? PDLC
Right.
as well.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of like bring back to sort of wrapping up the session. I know some questions are still coming through. We can answer it offline. But in the end, think about Dragonboat. The reason we come together, in addition to everyone rolling the same direction, really account for different roles here, right? So there's an executive here, there's obviously the teams here, then the, sort of stakeholder, cross-functional teams, and capacity management, program and project management, delivery engineering, and PDLC, again, operations. I think in the end, we all come together to build a product that really the right product for the customer, the right product to drive business, and then we have a good way to deliver it. And that's really what Dragonboat coming about, is to support your end-to-end strategic portfolio management, but you don't have to take all of them. You can take 1 or 2 or 3 of them as you're getting ready. So, if you're interested in the space, if your company going through the journey, talk to us, see how we can help you. And as Aaron and I shared earlier, having the visibility on the data is foundational, because from there, you can get people buying change, you can see where you're going, and you can make changes along the way. So we can even just start with that, integrate with all the data. Great session. Thank you so much, Aaron. And can't wait to see more of your insights coming through, and would love to learn more as you're evolving in your journey as well, in the Carfax journey of what worked better and some of the more learnings. And if you're if you want to learn more and get in touch with Aaron, here's the contact. And I know you teach MBA class as well, so I'm sure there's lots of fun, even more interesting conversations that we can learn from. And here's the Product Ops HQ again, sort of, it's a community we can all learn and share insights and ask questions. So with that, we are wrapping up today's session. Thank you, everyone. And you know where to find the people you're interested in, our community interested in, and I welcome you to also join us to learn a little bit more about Dragonboat as well. Thank you, Aaron. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Have a great day.
Thank you.